What it do? Welcome to another new episode of Locked On Bucks. The Milwaukee Bucks dropped their regular season finale to the Orlando Magic and also dropped from the 2 seed to the 3 seed to finish in the Eastern Conference standings. We'll discuss all the ramifications from today's loss, but look back on the season a little bit and more on today's episode of Locked On Bucks.
You are Locked On Bucks, your daily Milwaukee Bucks podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
You are Locked On Bucks, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm Camille Davis. You can catch me weekly on the Technical File podcast as well as the Pack-A-Day podcast. Joining me is Justin Garcia, voice of the Bucks Radio Network, and we truly do appreciate you for tuning in, and thank you for making Locked On Bucks your first listen every single day. We are free and available wherever you get your podcast, as well as on YouTube. And today's episode is brought to you by Monopoly Go. And I got to admit, I can be quite competitive, and I'm a big fan of Monopoly Go, the mobile hit twist on the classic Monopoly game. So join your friends and download Monopoly Go now for free on the App Store or in Google Play. Now, Justin, the Bucks entered into this game in control of their playoff seeding destiny. We discussed it on yesterday's show. You win and you secure the 2 seed. The Milwaukee Bucks had a great first quarter. And then after that, honestly, it was just all Orlando down the stretch. After the first quarter, the momentum shifted to Orlando and they never gave it back.
Yeah, the second quarter was really the disaster for the Bucks, where what were they, like 3 of 17, something like that?
Yep.
Yeah, I mean, 12 points scored too, and that's what Orlando brings to the table is defense. They like to play in transition, and Doc was asked about that before the game too. In that, look, he didn't use the verbiage of dodged a bullet, but it was a big miss to not have to contend with Franz Wagner in that matchup between these two teams earlier this week. That was not the case here. That was a big part of the problems that the Bucks were having, was everything that Franz was doing, getting them in transition. And, it's one thing to point to the second quarter numbers, and they were not good. But the bigger thing was just the Magic destroyed the Bucks in the paint. They nearly doubled them up, and fast break points too, as Doc has said countless times. We're going to win a mud wrestling match. We're not going to win a track meet, but still, even if that is not your strength and it is the strength of the Magic, 25-0 in fast break points. Like those two things, even taking the second quarter out of it, those two things were what decided the game. Because, after you watch that 11-point lead slip away, there were still a couple of moments in that second quarter where or third quarter, where they got it down to a single possession or at least 5 or 6 points. But it was, those two areas were constant throughout the game. And especially when you're playing without Giannis, you just, you can't give the other team that much rope. And I think it was no Giannis. It was those two things. And it was, unfortunately, as we'll get to, especially looking ahead to the playoffs, a game that you just can't have from Damian Lillard in the postseason. The Bucks will not go far if you're going to have Damian Lillard shooting 2 of 14.
Absolutely. I mean, Dame, as you mentioned, finished the game 2 of 14. He was 1 of 11 in the first half. And in the first quarter, he wasn't shooting as well. I believe that by the end of the first quarter, he was like 1 of 7 from the field. But he had gotten to the free throw line 8 times, I believe, by the end of the first quarter. So it was kind of like, okay, well, he's getting to the free throw line, is kind of supplementing the fact that the shot's not falling for him. But come second half, now, to be fair, it's not like he played a lot in the fourth quarter down the stretch here, but in the second half, he only took 3 additional shots there. He finished 1 of 3 in the second half. And that, like you said, it's not going to cut it in the playoffs. It's definitely not going to cut it when you're shorthanded without Giannis, who is somebody that we've pointed to as being the most consistent Buck on this team. Night in and night out, you know what to expect from Giannis. Of course, guys are human. They're going to have a bad game from time to time. But no Giannis tonight, You have Dame shooting 2 of 14. You have Chris finishing the game 6 of 15. I mean, at halftime, the two of them combined for, I believe, 3 of 18 from the field. And those are your two leading, like, that's who you're looking to like lead us in the scoring department. And they came up short. You mentioned the third quarter rally that the Bucks were able to put on. Chris had some big moments during that time as well. And Bobby Portis was the leading scorer for the Bucks. Like, the box score, you look at it, it's like, okay, leading score, 17 points. Like, we've talked about how things might look differently in the box score when you have multiple superstars like a Giannis and a Dame, where, hey, some nights you're going to see guys having 17, 18, 19 points and maybe just one guy having 30, but that one guy having 30 wasn't there. And when you pair the offense coming to a halt around a lot of the same things that we've seen throughout the season under Doc, when the offense doesn't seem to operate well, it was a lot of ISO ball. Which happened. The ball got stuck. It's the same story with this Bucks offense, and you saw it turn for them. So when the offense isn't clicking as well from all of these isolation plays, and you're getting bullied, the fast break points, you're getting bullied in the paint, like, it just was not a recipe for success for the Bucks tonight.
No, it was not. And look, I know we'll get into all of the bigger picture discussion a little bit later and throughout the week too, when we start to point to the playoffs. But you now have the full view that you can step back and look at. Here's what the Bucks did, because this game, I don't know what the Bucks motivation level was in this game, knowing you're playing without Giannis and knowing it wasn't quite as imperative for the Bucks as it was the Magic. They, for all intents and purposes, had to win to avoid the play-in tournament. But now we can at least view the 36 games under Doc Rivers, where you finished 17-19, I believe the record was. And some of these numbers will shift because in terms of where you rank because of games that are currently being played. But as of right now, you're basically flat in your net rating in those games. And look, as we've pushed back throughout the year and said it's unfair to just point to the record and everything else, we understand there's those caveats of the games that Chris Middleton missed the last week now, basically, that you played without Giannis and everything else, how much the schedule changed. It's just more for a point of context that it does match up with the eye test that this team 17-19, 113.3 defensive rating in those games under Doc. Not bad. It's in the top half as of this moment. And as we've long said, you'll live with that, right? As long as the offense is elite, 13th, 14th, somewhere around there, that should be good enough defensively. It's just not been there offensively. A 113.9 offensive rating, which is close to 20th since Doc Rivers took over. I'll point it out again. There's all those caveats where it's not fair to really say, well, what's wrong with the offense when you had so many games without Chris Middleton and others. But it doesn't inspire a whole lot of confidence. It doesn't feel, for as many times as people want to comp 2021 and say, well, there was this that happened that year too. It's not the same feeling you had going into the playoffs that year where you knew this thing is headed in the right direction. And I feel good about where this team is. So it's not to say it can't get there, but at least the way you close the season, it is not the same feeling.
Yeah, and listen, there are no more regular season games for them to play at this point to make us be like, hey, actually, they put together a good stretch here. Now I'm feeling all right. Like, we've seen what the Bucks' final stretch has been this season heading into the playoffs. And as you said, it's not really inspiring much confidence at the moment. So when we come back from the break, I just want to get your thoughts on this Bucks season as a whole, because this has been one for the books for sure. So we'll get into that.
It's been like 4 seasons. It feels like.
Into one, exactly.
Several rolled into one.
So we'll get into that after the break. Sometimes I can have a bad habit of waiting until the last minute to make a decision. Like, there might be a game or an event that I have interest in, and then I just don't pull the trigger until like the very last moment. That's why I rock with Game Time, because I can procrastinate and I can still get last minute tickets to the games and events that I want to attend. With Game Time, you can save up to 60% off of buying last minute for sports, concerts, comedy shows, theater, whatever it might be. And Game Time is now an authorized ticket marketplace for Major League Baseball, which now makes getting tickets even easier and faster. Prices on the Game Time app actually go down the closer it gets to the first pitch, which again, for someone like me, is a big benefit. With killer last minute deals, all in prices, views from your seat, and their lowest price guarantee, Game Time takes all of the guesswork out of buying MLB tickets or whatever tickets to whatever event you're looking to go to in your area. One of my favorite Game Time features outside of the last minute deals is being able to see a panoramic view from my seat before I actually purchase the ticket, because you don't want to end up going to an event somewhere you haven't been before and then you're like behind a aisle, or you can't see because it's blocked. Like, you will know with Game Time where you're sitting at before you even buy your tickets. So take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use the code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account, redeem the code LOCKEDONNBA, LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off. Download the Game Time app today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. We've all been there before, either as a player or as a fan. It's halftime, the scoreboard ain't looking good for your squad, you're feeling low, you're not sure if your team can pull out the win, and that's when you dig deep and you lift your head up. You say to yourself, "Self, it is time to get back into the game and pull off some bank heist and take as much of my friends' money as I possibly can." That's right. It's talking about the Smash mobile game Monopoly Go, which lets you compete with your friends to get the most richest and the biggest empire. It's the Monopoly you love, but on your phone. Anytime, with tons of new twists, including leaderboards to compare your progress to all of your friends. There is so much to do. You can play on countless dynamic Monopoly boards. You can make your friends bankrupt by smashing their landmarks with a wrecking ball. You can charge other players rent for your iconic properties. You can even work with your friends if you're not all, about, being the Drake to your friends, Rick Ross. You can work with your friends, crack open the community chest, and end tournaments to get extra rewards and climb that leaderboard. So get back out there, put on your game face, download Monopoly Go right now for free on the App Store or in Google Play. I say it often, but we truly do appreciate you for tuning in to Locked On Bucks. Time is valuable. You can't get it back. So I am thankful that you choose to spend it with us. A special shout out to the everydayers who tune in Monday through Friday. And I got to tell y'all, it's Locked On's NFL mock draft season. Mock Draft live on April 17th, 6 p.m. Central Time, streaming on the Locked On Sports Today 24/7 streaming channel, which you can find on YouTube or the free Amazon Fire TV channels app. You will find the ultimate 6-episode series to hear who the local Locked On experts are picking for every NFL franchise, with live reactions from local college football experts and even a fantasy football angle. So get the jump on all your friends when it's coming to prep for fantasy football. Check out the Locked On NFL mock draft on April 17th at 6 p.m. Central Time, streaming live on Locked On Sports Today 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube or the free Amazon Fire TV channels app. Now, Justin, the season, as we mentioned, has come to a close. You said it accurately. It's been like 4 seasons wrapped into one this particular year for the Bucks. They end the season now with a 49-33 record. Unfortunately, they have dropped 8 of their last 11 games to end the season. So, Justin, when you look back on this season, what is something that's going to stick out to you about this 2023-24 team? And again, this can all change drastically come playoff time, because that's what this team's playing for. We know that they have a level of urgency here. That's why they're paying 3 head coaches. Like, we understand that. But just looking at the regular season with this coming to a close, what's going to stick out to you?
That's a really good question, Camille. I don't know if it's the right word to use, but I suppose what stands out to me is chaos.
I like that. Well, I don't like that it was chaos, but I like the word selection.
That it's just, there's been so much change and inconsistency, and it really dates back to that playoff series against the Miami Heat. And, we're approaching a calendar year to that point where you have game 1. Giannis suffers the back injury, and it is funny. I think we've talked about this before on the show, but just hearing it maybe hasn't shifted, but how much the narrative has started to change of, well, you never know. If Giannis was healthy, who knows how that series goes? We heard none of that at the time that it was played. It is almost 1 year ago to the day. It was April 16th was when the Bucks played game 1 against the Miami Heat. And, Camille, just think about how much has changed in 300 and what is it going to be? 365, 364 days. You've had 4 coaches of the team in that time period. One of them an interim coach. Changes to your assistants. You had the trade for Damian Lillard. You had more injuries to Chris Middleton. You had another injury right around the playoffs to Giannis. You had more threats in your division. I mean, that was the other part of it is in years past, the Bucks, even through some of that up and down play that they would experience at times, you always knew you could get yourself right within your division. We're sure you had teams that were on the rise, but think about the Bucks' record in division the last few years and think about where it was now. That had Cleveland won today, you wouldn't have won the division because they finished with a better divisional record than you. So, we kind of joked about it, but in many ways it does feel like this has been 4 or 5 seasons rolled into one. When you think about there's the Adrian Griffin version of this team. There's, the 3 games of Joe Prunty where you were just kind of in that uncertainty where we kind of knew it was going to be Doc Rivers. You didn't know yet. Then there was the Doc Rivers portion. There's been the Bucks with Chris Middleton. There's been the Bucks without Chris Middleton. There was the offseason where you thought, okay, I wonder what's going to happen because nobody as a 1 seed stays pat and says, let's just run this thing back. We think we had bad luck when you lose as an 8 seed. And it took very, very long time, but then Damian Lillard comes in. So it's just, we've kind of mentioned it before. In many ways, you just feel like, man, I just need a break. And I can't imagine what the players would feel like going through this as well. And that's why we made the point around the All-Star break of the Bucks are probably the team most in need of the All-Star break at this moment. You could make a case they're the team most in need of this week-long break going into the postseason. Absolutely. For some reasons that I think we'll get to a little bit later that Doc Rivers pointed to as well. But it's just been when are you going to catch your breath and come up for air type of feel to this season.
It absolutely has. And that's part of the reason why when looking ahead to the playoffs, I have no feel or read on how this team is going to perform because it has been such an up and down season. There were stretches of games where I'm watching this team and I'm like, wow, they're really rounding into form here. I think about the team coming out of All-Star break where we're like, hey, some of the things that we were seeing by the numbers with this team and where areas they're improving, we're seeing it come into fruition now with wins attached to it. But then you have just some very mind-boggling losses along the way as well. And then the most recent thing in everyone's mind, of course, is the most recent losing streak that came with the Wizards, the Grizzlies, the Raptors, and then the Knicks, where you're just like, this has just been a lot to figure out and try to understand because we've mentioned it before. Like heading into the playoffs, you want to see your team playing at its peak form. You want to see them rounding into form. You want to see something that inspires confidence about how the team is playing. And that wasn't something that we really saw this season. And we're going to talk a little bit more in the next segment just about our feelings with this upcoming playoff series. But one thing that will stand out to me, if I had to say in the word inconsistent, would probably be the word that I use, just like a roller coaster of a season. And also a year where there were a lot of different records being broken along the way by some key Bucks figures with Giannis and Chris. I mean, we saw Giannis break the franchise record for points in the game. We saw him climb up the leaderboards in various categories. We saw Chris climb the leaderboards. And the other piece of that with this regular season coming to a close that it makes me think about is just like, this era of Bucks basketball and how much longer will we have it? Again, I'm not going to project and say like, hey, if the Bucks lose here, this and this and this is going to happen because if the Bucks lose, me and you have a lot to talk about. So we can use that as some off-season conversation, but it just deepens the appreciation again that I have for Chris Middleton, for Giannis Antetokounmpo, for the Bobby Portis, Pat Connaughton, and Brook Lopez era that we've had with these Milwaukee Bucks and what they've been able to accomplish. I mean, this is the 6th straight year they've won the Central Division. Of course, as you mentioned, that came because the Cavaliers lost, but 6th straight year of them winning that. Like, it's been an interesting season, and it's a season where the playoffs will really summarize for us who this team truly is. Is it a team that maybe needed more time? Like, will they look better after an off season? Will they bring this team back for another season, another chance at it? If they flame out in the playoffs, it's hard to say at this point, but It's been a really, really interesting season. I have to say, for it to be our first season as the official host of Locked On Bucks as well. So this season will also be memorable for that reason for me as well.
Well, and speaking of that, I remember with our old friend when we were, I think all of us were on together right after that deal was made to bring in Damian Lillard, and we talked about projections and what to expect for this season. And to your point, we've seen it for stretches where you feel pretty good about where things are headed, but it just hasn't been consistent. And I kept pointing to 2021 and some of the comps there where it took a while, right? And we thought we got there, but there's just been a lot of start and stops, and there's been a lot going into that with this group, that the injuries, everything going on off the court with Damian Lillard as well, having to learn new teammates, coaching changes. But we all talked about, okay, what to expect. And I remember the 3-point record coming up too of, well, I mean, now with Malik Beasley too, you got two guys that are really going to challenge. I'd be shocked if that record doesn't fall. Dame and I think Bees both eclipsed Ray Allen for attempts. So Damian Lillard is the career, the Bucks single season record holder there. Malik came into today needing 5 to match Ray Allen for the single season. I don't think he hit one today.
He did not. Him or Dame did not hit a 3 tonight.
Yeah. So, I mean, you have two guys that hit more than 223s this season, but Ray Allen's record still stands. And, for whatever reason, once it gets to be late in the season for the Bucks, there's, I guess, just a lid on the basket, especially when you're attempting threes. So you get the sense that record is going to stand for quite some time for Ray Allen.
Yeah, coming into the game, I was like, hey, I think Dame needed like 10 threes or something like that for him to pass it. And I was like, I'm not sure if we'll get that. I would love to see it, but not sure if we do. Listen, that Ray Allen record is one in particular where I'm looking at and I'm like, that's impressive, especially given when he was playing in the NBA and just the efficiency, the clip that Ray Allen was shooting at. It was very impressive. Those Ray Allen big dog, Sam Cassell Bucks will always have a special place in my heart. Like, I remember being at a middle school dance and the Bucks were having their playoff game against Charlotte, I believe it was. And the DJ had the game on like behind the booth. And it was like me and a group of people like not worrying about the dance. Like we were not being teenagers and trying to get our dance on. We were looking at the game and watching the Bucks. So some twisted. I should have known back then, Justin. Like this was like my future. I'm sitting here missing opportunity to meet the love of my life to watch Bucks basketball. But there's still much more to talk about in today's episode. Now that we know who the Bucks will be playing in the first round of the playoffs, it's time for the Pacers. So we'll talk a little bit more about that matchup coming up next. PrizePicks is America's #1 fantasy sports app with more than 3 million members. It is the easiest and the most exciting way to get in on the action while you watch your favorite sports and players. You just pick more or less than on 2 or more player projection stats, and then you watch the winnings roll in. And now you can get in on the playoff action and win up to 100 times your money on PrizePicks as you and the world's best players take the game to a new level during basketball's postseason. The play-in is a couple of days away now. You can now win up to 100 times your money, like I said, with as little as 4 correct picks. That means you can turn $10 into $1,000 with basketball, hockey, college basketball, and whatever it is that you want to play on PrizePicks, America's #1 fantasy sports app. PrizePicks is the best way to get in on the action in more than 30 states across the country, including California, Texas, Georgia, and of course, Wisconsin. Download the app today and use the code LOCKEDONNBA for a first deposit match up to $100. Again, download the app today and use the code LOCKEDONNBA for a first deposit match up to $100. PrizePicks, pick more, pick less. It's that easy. All right. We now know, as I mentioned, who the Bucks will be playing in the first round of the playoffs, and that is going to be the Indiana Pacers. I won't lie, Justin. Once Joe Ingles knocked down a 3 in the fourth quarter, it pushed the lead up to like 14 or 15 points at that point. I was like, okay, let me see what's happening in New York right now, because at that time I already knew the Cavs lost to the Hornets. So I was like, okay, the Bucks are going to end up being that 2 seed if the Knicks lose, since the Cavs already lost, or they're going to be the 3 seed if the Knicks can win this game. And as we know now, the Knicks won, making the Bucks the 3 seed in the East, matching up against the Pacers, who have the 6 seed. So, I mean, one little benefit of not being a top 2 seed is you know who your opponent is during the play-in tournaments. You're able to be like, okay, we can start game planning now. But how are you feeling about the Bucks meeting up with the Pacers in the first round of the playoffs now?
I mean, I think we're very aligned in what you said before about projecting the playoffs. That I don't know what to expect from this group, for better or worse. That you could talk me into any scenario, and it's like we talked about last week too, Camille, before we knew where the Bucks were going to be and who their opponent was. Where we had said, if you're out on this team, fine, I can't talk you out of that. If you still believe, there's information, there's data to point to. Here's the reason to believe in this team. So that's what makes this group so unique. I mean, I would be lying if I said I would not much rather play the Pacers than the 76ers, which you may not even get as the 2 seed. But I suppose that is maybe the Bucks made the best of this weekend, with the fact that, number one, you avoid the Celtics half of the bracket. And you get the Pacers, a team that I know they beat you 4 times, and I know they're very confident. And as Doc Rivers joked, yeah, they beat us 4 out of 5 times. It's a good matchup for us. But both of these teams are very different since then. Obviously, the big piece is Doc Rivers is now the coach of the Bucks. All of those games were played January 3rd or earlier. And look, on the other side of it too, the Bucks did not face Pascal Siakam in any of those games. So that will change things for Giannis. If we see Giannis, I mean, that's the other part that we kind of talked about on the pod the other day too. That's what makes it even more difficult to level set expectations or realistically handicap anything for the Bucks, is that we just don't know. We don't know if Giannis will be ready for the start. We don't know if Giannis will be ready for the middle. We don't know if Giannis will have to come back in round 2 or the conference finals if you get that far. So that's kind of the fly in the ointment through all of this. But again, at the risk of disrespecting the Pacers, I would say, look, if there's a chance that Giannis is not ready at the start, and maybe you get him, that Jalen Brunson scenario we talked about a couple of years ago with the Mavs, 3-4 games into the series, or Luka Doncic, I should say. I would much rather that series be against the Pacers than the 76ers and a resurgent Joel Embiid. But, again, there are some positives that you're avoiding Boston until the conference finals at the earliest, and that it's a team that doesn't pose as many threats as Philadelphia does. But it's still a very weird spot to be in going into the postseason, where we just don't know.
Yeah, we don't know at all. And even though they might not pose as many problems as the 76ers do, which I definitely agree with.
I'm glad you're cleaning that up. Yes, they do pose problems.
They pose some problems for this Bucks team. And this was a matchup where I was like, it will be fun to see them in the playoffs if we do, because I feel like part of what made Pacers Bucks so fun during the regular season was actually the in-season tournament, having these teams play that 5th game against each other. Just another one to throw in there with the game ball gate during the game where the Bucks actually did win, and Giannis setting the record to the 4 losses they've had to the Pacers. I mean, I saw the quotes floating around on Twitter today, and it made me laugh. I was like, thank you guys for bringing these back up. But after we lost, and Giannis was talking about the Pacers beating them 4 times, and he's like, I mean, you think about it. When you go home and you sleep and you wake up, you're thinking about it. You go back, you work out, you think about it. You're about to get freaky at night, you think about it. This is something that this team has been thinking about since the Pacers had their number this season, because the Pacers were a team that stood up to the Bucks the whole way through. It was like, we're not scared of you, and we think we match up really well with you. So forget all of what championship pedigree you guys might have or championship expectations your team has. We're not scared of it. And that energy is something that is really entertaining for me as a fan of the game in itself when looking at the series. Of course, there's the on-court aspect of it, and we'll be breaking down how these two teams match up and how differently they match up now, post-trade deadline, post-Doc Rivers coming in. But there is some bad blood between these two teams already, and it should amp up even more come playoff time. Even Malik Beasley had made a comment I know we're going to play them in the playoffs. And he said this January, and he's like, and it's not going to be pretty for them when we do. So I hope that energy comes through. And like you said, a lot dependent upon Giannis's health. If he's healthy in this series, if he's ready to, I should say, if he's ready to go at the start of this series, because we are not going to be aware of like how good he's feeling once he comes back. Like our eyes will tell us a certain bit of it, but I mean, at this point in the season, most guys aren't 100%. It's a long season. And you mentioned Doc talking about ending. He was like, yeah, I mean, they've had our number all year, but to that end, Doc felt as if they were a perfect opponent for this Bucks team, because you're going to have to play somebody and they are tough. So like they got confidence. It's going to be a great test for us to see where our focus is at. And that's going to set the tone for this Bucks team, because my mentality is still the same, where it comes down to being like, you got to go out there and beat whoever's in front of you. Like, yeah, cool. You avoided Philly. You don't have Miami in the first round, but you do have a team that has some smoke for you and that you have some bad blood against as well. So you have to show up and play. And this is a great, I think, series to open up the playoffs for the Bucks. Again, this could swing multiple ways. I wouldn't be surprised if it was a first round out for the Bucks, and I wouldn't be surprised again if the Bucks are in the finals. Like, this team has shown in stretches what they can be, and it's just about, now that we're down to the playoffs, best of 7 series, what are we going to get from the Bucks a majority of the time?
Consistency, yeah. And we talked about it before, and look, neither of us are pointing the finger or blaming any singular player or coach. And again, it's the thing that drives me the most nuts is the rush to all the Doc Rivers memes and, oh, look at that record under Doc Rivers, because of everything that rolls into it. But again, it's just, when we talked about expectations and comparisons, fair or not, there is going to be a load of pressure on Damian Lillard in this postseason run, especially if you do not have Giannis for parts of the postseason. And days like today, and the Bucks are not going to advance far with or without Giannis, if that's what you're getting from Damian Lillard. It is not to say that Damian Lillard is the reason why they lost this game, or that Damian Lillard will be that reason. But that's unfortunately where they're at. When we talked about their offense and defense, that the defense has been good enough, but that only applies if your offense is at the level that we saw for portions of this season. Damian Lillard's a big piece of that, to get your offense there. Now, not to just make this doom and gloom in the negative podcast, but I think some of the things optimistically to point to are, you look at this last week of the regular season, we talked about Damian Lillard being impacted more than anyone by the officiating changes since the end of January. He had 2 consecutive games with 10 or more free throw attempts, and then you had the one that you just throw out of the mix because there were 2 total free throws attempted in the game. But got there, what was it, 13 or 12 times again today. So he started to get that. That's going to be huge for the Bucks half-court offense. But the big thing is you have to get yourself right. And that's why going into this weekend was very strange for a number of reasons, that in years past we would point to what would the Bucks potentially do here, but you had kind of seen that consistency. You haven't really had that. So I think it doesn't really matter who you draw. If you're going to play like you did in the second quarter today, that's going to present a load of challenges regardless of who the opponent is. So the big thing is just, how do we get right and turn this thing around going into that series starting this weekend? Doc has said a number of times, this week off, it's not a week off for us, that it's going to be a training camp of sorts, and mentioned Chris Middleton specifically, and that I think he's in good conditioning. We need him, and we need everybody to get in great conditioning. And that's what this week is going to be about. Putting in some new installs as well, and using a training camp where this is the first time that Doc Rivers is going to have had more than 2 or 3 consecutive days of off days to work with this team. He wasn't here in the offseason. So I think that's the other thing you would point to and say, look, that's something that's going to boost this team going forward as well. But, ultimately the biggest thing is going to be the health of Giannis and where that's at. Again, not to say, as we both articulated, that the Pacers do not present challenges, and especially if that Indiana offense is going to look like they did today when they, oh, by the way, had another 86-point half. But you do feel like, okay, given the 2 options here, and let's be clear, there was no guarantee you were getting Philadelphia in the first round as the 2 seed, although I kind of feel like that's going to happen. I don't know about you. But given the 2 options, I think you can hold up better against the Pacers without Giannis if need be than you would against the 76ers, because Philly, for all intents and purposes, is a 2 or a 3 seed. As we joked about it last year with Miami, it's not really an 8 seed. Philadelphia is definitely not a 7 seed. When Joel Embiid went out, I think they were the 3 seed. They were in the 1 and 2 spots for a lot of the season when he was healthy. So this is clearly not a 7 seed, and that's the challenge that Philadelphia is going to present. But I'll throw 3 quick things at you, Camille, and get your reaction to all of these. Number 1, I think we talked about this last time. The Bucks streak is intact. It is now over a decade. 2013 is still the last time they have won on the final day of the regular season. The New York Knicks finished second with 50 wins, and the Bucks finished with 49 wins. It is the first time since 2017-18, in other words, the year before Bud, that the Bucks did not win 60% of their games or more. And the 50 wins by the New York Knicks are the fewest for a number 2 seed in the Eastern Conference in a full 82-game season since the Cavaliers won 50 games in 2007. So It has been a minute since we've seen this much parity, maybe you would say, or mediocrity throughout the conference. And, the other thing that I would point to is I've heard this comp thrown around quite a bit. And the first few times you hear it, I think the inclination is to dismiss it and say, no, this isn't that team. But there are more signs. And again, I'm not saying this is perfect, but there are more signs and things that have bubbled up throughout the course of the season that make you think, wonder if there's something to that. I've heard a number of comparisons between this Bucks team and that 2018-19, where this is headed already, Celtics team that the Bucks beat in the second round of the playoffs. And that was a loaded Celtics team with a lot of talent. And the Bucks destroyed them in the second round. And you think about the talent and waiting for that group to come together. As good as they were, they finished 4th in the Eastern Conference that year. The Celtics' first-round opponent that year was the Indiana Pacers. And their second to last game of the regular season was against the Orlando Magic. So, unfortunately, there are some similarities there between those 2 teams.
There is going to be so many interesting things for us to talk about this week leading into the start of that playoff series against the Pacers, which is, I'm going to just plug us for everybody listening. Make sure that you are tuning in to Locked On Bucks throughout the week, because I'm just sitting here thinking about the last point you made in regards to the East and how this is the first time since 2007 that the 2 seed at like the 50 game mark.
Yeah.
And that matches the eye test, because the end of this regular season was just so bonkers in the East, where it's teams losing. You're like, they lost to them? Really? This okay. We saw it with the Bucks. We've saw it firsthand, but like the Cavaliers went on their losing streak. The Knicks were up and down for a while. Like the 76ers had to overcome the Embiid injury and come. Like it's just been, and the Heat have just been, I don't know what the Heat have been doing exactly over there this year. It has just been inconsistent from them as well. Of course, they had the injuries that played a big part into that as well. But it's just been one of those years here in the Eastern Conference where it's like, how many of these teams are really good? Like, is this just a year where Boston is going to just roll through everybody because they have shown that they are the cream of the crop? Or is this what we're seeing, parity and a lot of good teams that all can throw a really strong shot at Boston? But there's going to be a lot to discuss here.
When you mentioned the Heat, it's like that scene. I don't know if you've seen Up in the Air with George Clooney and Anna Kendrick when what's his Danny McBride, when his character is trying to sell George Clooney on buying property and just met with dead ends and says, "So you're good, huh?" And George Clooney just, "I'm good." That's been the Miami Heat the last 2 years, I think, is what we've seen. And real quick, we'll have to tune into Locked On Cavs to hear their synopsis. But I don't know about you. I just approached the day thinking, what are the Cavs doing? Not just the injury report with basically holding out everybody but other bigs, but the way they handled the fourth quarter too, where they basically punted the game. I look, if you're that confident, more power to you. But if you can avoid the half of the bracket where the Boston Celtics are, I don't know why you wouldn't do that. Yeah. So maybe there's some grand plan here that we don't know of. But that was one of the bigger things that I left kind of scratching my head on is, number one, does anybody want the 2 seed when you saw the Knicks going to overtime with the Bulls, and then just the way the Cavs approach things?
Yeah, it was strange. Like you mentioned, I did not expect for Cleveland to lose. I did not think the Knicks would lose. So I figured the Bucks shot at a 2 seed was going to be them getting the victory. That's why I was like, worst case scenario for me would be the 3rd seed in the East. They landed in that. So like I'm okay with it. Now we roll that ball out and we get to work. So again, make sure you guys stay locked into Locked On Bucks throughout the week. We're going to have some great content for you guys leading up to this first round playoff matchup against the Pacers. So for Justin and myself, we'll bid you adieu. Have a good one.